New World, an action combat MMORPG released by Amazon Games in September of 2021. I've heard people say this is hands down their favorite MMO of all time, and others have told me that they will never, ever play this game again. So why is this? How can one game be so loved but also so hated at the same time? New World is a mere 2-year-old game set in a fantastical world based on the Americas in the 17th century, featuring your typical sword and shield and magic, but also guns and machinery that might be typical from that time period. The game features engaging PvE, PvP, an intuitive crafting system, and much, much more. I personally completely missed the hype of New World's release and never actually got a chance to try the game until now. Because despite New World's immense success on release, seeing over 900,000 concurrent players, its swift drop-off to less than 75,000 players within the matter of a few months was not particularly enticing to me at the time. Most people say that they loved the game during its release and that it was one of the most enjoyable day one experiences despite exceedingly long login times. However, as time went on, some of the problems within the game began to show themselves as the game was clearly not a fully finished product. To me, this sounds like the game must have amazing fundamentals and ideas regarding game design in order to captivate such a large audience. However, some of the nitty-gritty design and details that began to appear and were unearthed after a bit of playtime left players feeling lost, confused, and even angry. However, a new expansion was just released called Rise of the Angry Earth. We'll get into all of its specific additions and details later on, but I figured now would be a good time to try out New World for the first time. I'm assuming that many of the bugs and kinks that came out with the game originally have all been fixed or at least worked on, and I feel like right now would probably be the right time to give the game a fair review. Is this MMO that has been so loved but also so hated finally turning a new leaf? Let's find out. I entered the world of Eternum knowing next to nothing about the game. I was greeted with a really nice character customization screen that doesn't quite compare to the depth that you can go with customization in other MMOs, however, I didn't feel as though I personally needed much more. With a few scars and a tattoo, I made my way into the tutorial. The very first thing I would like to mention about New World is the graphics. They had me pretty well captivated from the very first moment that I set foot in the game. Eternum is absolutely beautiful, with a day and night cycle and different lighting effects along with music and audio that sets the scene probably better than I've seen any other MMO previously. BDO might be a close second, but Amazon Games did a fantastic job with the artistic style of the game, and although graphics are hardly a metric of how much fun you can actually have in the game, it definitely doesn't hurt if the graphics and visuals are top-notch, and in New World, they definitely are. Now, in terms of first impressions, let me go through a bit of the things that went through my mind as I first experienced the game. First of all, the user interface looked clean, felt responsive, and simple while displaying all the relevant information in a way that didn't clutter your screen or take away from gameplay. Basically, all you can ask from an MMO. Secondly, movement felt janky, for lack of a better word. Running and jumping did not feel as smooth as I was used to from other MMOs where mobility is generally fluid and almost second nature, but I chalked this up to me just being new to the game. Third, I was immediately impressed with the action combat that is pretty unique for an MMO, though standard in other games. Left click to swing, hold for a heavy attack, right click to block. I'll have some things to say about the combat system later, which are a little bit less than ideal, but my first impression was that the combat felt really good, and it seemed to reward more skill than just memorizing a rotation. Also, I realized after character customization that I had not picked a class, and so I rightly assumed that this game is a classless MMO. Generally, this excites me because some of my favorite games I've played in the past allow you to play the game however you want to play, and hopefully switching between playstyles is a fairly seamless process. Which I can say after having about 100 hours into New World at this point, they definitely do that pretty well. Basically, all of your skills and abilities are dictated by which type of weapon you're wielding, and every type of weapon has its own talent tree, essentially, that you can level up over time. It's a super unique system that I was excited to jump into. New World makes switching between different weapon builds and even respecking, as it were, a fairly cheap and easy process, even allowing for presets to be available for different specs. If you need to switch between PvP and PvE, and then from a healer to a tank, all of that is possible, and that's a total W in my books. Also, just as a quick aside, this game features very minimal fall damage, which is another total W. The next thing I noticed in terms of first impressions was wait. Is every single thing that I come across something that I can interact with? The answer is basically a simple yes. If you come across a rock or a bush or a tree or a river or a farm animal, you can mine, harvest, cut, fish, kill, and skin basically everything in the game. This was my first introduction to the gathering system that of course feeds into the crafting and trade skill system that New World has really done a fantastic job with. 19 different skills from gathering to refining and crafting, along with some casual skills like music and riding. I was thoroughly impressed. And what's pretty awesome about the system is you don't have to just pick two. If you want to level every single skill up to the skill level cap of 250, you can do that whenever you'd like. During my time leveling, I was constantly stopping to mine a rock or fishing by a river with a particularly nice view. This system plays really well with the graphics and immersion of the game. I mean, just listen to how it sounds when I mine this rock. In the first hour of the game, I think I had fallen in love with this MMO more than almost any other game I had played. Seriously, the first and new player impressions that New World left on me was probably one of the most compelling hooks for a new game that I've ever started. The world felt enormous, full of life and possibility, full of different cool systems and gear and talent trees and levels, and I was pretty excited for what the future had in store for me. The leveling process began decently fast, as I think within the first few hours of gameplay I had already reached level 20, and I was beginning to understand the flow of story quests and side quests, both rewarding sizable chunks of XP, decent armor that progressed nicely with your character, as well as a bit of gold. I spent some time looking for a merchant to sell my things before realizing that everything you sell in the game can only be sold to other players via the trading post, and anything else you generally drop or salvage, which results in materials for crafting and repairing your gear. Speaking of the trading post, one thing I would like to mention is that New World's economy felt a little strange to me, especially as a new player. It seemed like almost nothing really retained much value. After over 100 hours of gameplay, I only really used the trading post a few times to upgrade my tools and purchase different types of potions and crafting materials. But things that you would assume would be quite valuable are actually quite cheap, and things that you think would be super cheap for some reason cost more than you'd expect. Something else that stood out to me during my time leveling is that generally inventory space or weight was not really an issue that I struggled with. I'm sure this can be quite different from the experience of someone who has multiple hundreds of hours in the game, but it was nice as a new player to not have to worry about basically picking up or gathering everything that I wanted. Each new area also has its own storage shed, which basically acts as a bank as well if your inventory did end up getting too full. However, I will say the storage system is a little convoluted, as you kind of have to remember what you put in each storage shed in each zone. I wish it was just an unlimited, centralized system so that you wouldn't have to potentially travel in order to get items you may have left in different zones. It was at this point when I first really interacted with water. And I say interacted, but I use that term oh so lightly. Currently, your character cannot swim. In fact, you can't even float. Instead, your character death walks into the sea, moving at about 50% slower speed, and also begins to hold their breath, with a timer counting down from 20, at which point, if it reaches 0, your character will begin to die. I don't understand why they would add deep water into the environment without also adding the ability to swim. It feels like something that I could forgive in a beta, but 2 years into a product's full release, this really surprised me, as it felt so different from the quality I was beginning to expect from the rest of this game. Also, while leveling, I noticed a significant power increase whenever I leveled up a particular weapon or got a new ability or attribute, as well as assigning attributes to my character or gearing up. This is important to me, as I think too many MMOs these days water down the leveling experience to be fairly similar, in the sense that getting new armor and gear doesn't always feel as good as it should. New World does this quite nicely, and I had fun experimenting with a few different builds and ideas. However, I started to stick with two-handed weapons along with a gun or a bow as a secondary. Especially while leveling, I particularly enjoyed the Greatsword and the Great Axe, and it was nice to have a range option as a secondary, as it made some quests a lot more trivial because I could shoot things from a distance. I quickly realized the importance of blocking and dodging and weapon swapping, and all things considered, I think I picked up some of the nuances of the combat system quite quickly. It felt so good when it was working properly. But it didn't always work properly, or at least it felt that way. One major drawback of the combat system is the enemy's ability to stagger your character. So if one enemy attacks you, it might paralyze your character and stun lock them for a second, which is fine. But if, let's say, 3 or 4 or 6 even mobs are attacking you, well, you'd be hard-pressed to move at all or even get out alive. This was easily my biggest pain point with the game during my leveling process, because sometimes it didn't feel like I could have done anything differently. I basically just had to sit there as my character was stun locked and couldn't complete any actions while taking constant damage. It doesn't happen all the time or in every single quest, but it happens enough that at least for me, it really started to piss me off. I think Amazon should do away with the character blocking and stun lock effect of mobs, because I can imagine that anger being a quit moment for people who are a little bit less invested in the game. Maybe they need to make enemies a bit stronger or give them a bit more HP to balance the system out, but in my opinion, it feels and plays really bad when you have 5 mobs attacking you and there's nothing you can do. Like I said, when the combat is working properly, it's literally some of the best combat I've ever experienced in an MMO. That being said, I've also never gotten so annoyed with a combat system that I loved. It's almost reminiscent of what I said earlier about the overall sentiment of New World, in that it's a game that is loved, but also hated. Very bittersweet. And that makes sense because I think a game's combat system is one of the most fundamental and important parts of the gameplay. At some point around level 20, I got to a part in the main story quest that had me enter my first dungeon, or expedition as they are called in New World. Expeditions work like this. They're located in many different spots around the map, and essentially you open up a menu by clicking on them and joining an existing group. Generally you want a tank, 3 DPS, and a healer. However, in my first run, we had a level 59 with us named Bozoland. He was trying to help out his level 19 friend by taking him through the dungeon, and they offered to take me as well. He also told me if I need help with any quest to add him and shoot him a message. Unfortunately, after the dungeon was over, I never did meet up with Bozoland again, but I hope he's doing well. Either way, expeditions were really cool. Some have jumping puzzles, some have mysteries and secret areas. They're generally really well designed, and although I've only done a handful of the more endgame ones, every expedition that I came across while leveling was genuinely a really cool and fun experience, where I played with quite the variety of other players from brand new like myself to longtime vets. Now, one thing I quickly began to pick up on is that New World operates on a faction system. Essentially, every server has 3 factions made up of different players of the server, and these factions can control or take over different parts of areas of the map. You could participate in massive open world PvP battles with the other differing factions in order to try and gain more control of the map. I actually ended up joining a faction quite by accident around level 30 because I noticed a quest I could pick up had a slightly different quest marker. At this point, I'm probably outing myself as a spacebar warrior or an E to interact warrior, as it might be in New World, because I hardly read the finer details of this quest, but noticed shortly after finishing it that I had aligned myself with the Covenant faction. I was still too low level to take part in any of the open world PvP that might come along with this, but factions also include a daily mission system. Essentially, you get 3 PvE and 3 PvP missions that you can complete daily for reputation within your faction, as well as some bonus gold or experience. Now, the server size of New World is capped at 2,500 players, which is really quite small compared to a lot of other games. There were certain times where it felt like I didn't see anybody, and then there was other times where it felt like people were around me at all times. It was definitely nice pulling up to a boss fight or a quest, and someone had already had the monster halfway dead, so I just had to jump in and help. Boom, quest completed. That being said, one thing I would really like to point out is that New World does an amazing job of making its cities feel quite lively. Each zone has between 1 and 3 outposts or cities, though I hesitate to call them cities as they're generally a little bit smaller than something like a Stormwind from World of Warcraft. However, in my entire time playing thus far, I've yet to enter an outpost and not see other players hanging around, crafting, chatting, playing music. The crafting system requires different hotspots that are generally available in every outpost, and you can be constantly moving between them, which really creates this chaotic environment where people are constantly going back and forth between different areas and outposts. And it honestly does a great job of making the game feel a little bit more like a living, breathing world, which in my opinion is super important when we're talking about an MMO. But at this point, I had one major critique that was really beginning to stand out to me, and probably my biggest critique of the entire game, is that at many points within New World, the game feels extremely copy-paste. Anyone who has even played a little bit of New World knows exactly what I'm talking about. I think in my entire time leveling, I probably fought about 20 different variants of the same mobs. Undead, undead pirates, wolves, angry earth, ghosts, more ghosts. Many of the outposts are extremely similar in design. Many areas left me with a sense of deja vu, like I had been there before. Luckily, I'm an imaginative person and I was able to suspend my disbelief long enough for me to still enjoy these areas, but I would love to see Amazon Games redesign a lot of the different mobs and cities and points of interest so that they have more of a unique feel. I wasn't sure just yet if the future expansions or areas added to the game remedied the situation with the newer content. However, speaking a little bit about the expansion, let's get into one of the biggest mistakes I made while playing this game as a new player. So far, I had gotten to level 50 without purchasing the Rise of the Angry Earth expansion. Big mistake. I recommend for anyone watching this and wanting to seriously give New World a go to consider buying the new expansion because you're going to save yourself a tremendous amount of time. You see, New World is a game of traveling, seriously. Compared to other popular MMOs available right now, the amount of traveling that you need to do while leveling up and playing New World is much higher than most other games. There is a fast travel system, but you have to be at an outpost or a particular fast travel node to be able to use it. On top of that, you can set your inn to any outpost in the game and travel there whenever you want, but this has a 15-minute cooldown. I probably spent the majority of my time leveling so far just traveling from place to place. This has some pros and cons. The pros being that the world feels much larger and real. You really feel as if you're traveling vast parts of land in order to get wherever you need to be. It adds a lot of weight to the movement within the game, and actually, I don't mind it as much as I thought I might. The cons being, well, of course, you spend a lot of time traveling. With all that being said, the new expansion added mounts to the game, apparently quite a controversial decision at first. You can acquire a mount as early as level 25, and I probably could have saved myself literal hours of playtime if I had just purchased the expansion and got my mount without almost finishing the main story quest first. That being said, the expansion added riding as a new skill along with 3 new types of mounts you can get, starting with the horses at level 25, wolves at level 45, and even a lion once you're max level. I quickly got myself situated with both a horse and a wolf since I already had the levels to complete those quests. I'll talk more about the expansion and my thoughts on it later, but wow, I think mounts were a much needed and welcome addition to the game. Because of how mounts work, the increased speed, along with the ability to sprint, but only for a short period of time, really balances the ridiculous amount of traveling you need to do into more manageable and bite-sized chunks without devaluing the size of the world too much. If I'm being completely honest, I wouldn't want to see much more speed additions or even flying mounts added to the game, as I think anything more than the current system they recently added might be too much and would diminish the world's massive feel. With all that being said, I managed to get to the previous max level cap of 60 with about 45 hours of game time. I'm sure that's extraordinarily slow, but I like to take my time and enjoy the scenery a bit while leveling. Whether that's just gathering or hanging out in towns and talking to NPCs, fast-tracking your experience to level cap, in my opinion, diminishes one of the most enjoyable aspects of any MMO, and that's being a new player in the honeymoon stage. I don't think the leveling took too long. It seemed like a nice balance, if a bit tedious at times, because I was kind of running out of quests to do on my way to 60. The main story finished nicely with a fairly difficult boss fight and an introduction to one of the higher level expeditions that you can start doing, which, without spoiling too much, was single-handedly one of the coolest looking dungeons I've ever experienced in an MMO. Super unique boss fights and mechanics, as well as plenty of top tier loot. But now that I was level 60, the only thing left for me to do was to jump into the new expansion and all of the new content that it offers. However, I want to touch on a couple of different systems that I haven't really had the chance to delve into completely, just to make sure that I cover all the bases in this video. First, player-owned housing. They have a really cool system where essentially in every single outpost of the game, you can purchase a player-owned house for no small amount of GP, at least not for me. You get some free fast travel bonuses to your player-owned house, and on top of that, you can decorate your house with an absolutely ridiculous amount of different cosmetics earned in-game or through the store. It's a total completionist dream, and something I can't wait to truly dive headfirst into and spend way too much time working on. Secondly, PvP is also pretty active, and you're given a few different options in New World. Me personally, I tried one of the 20 versus 20 outpost rushes, which is a domination type game. I think I need to research a specific PvP build before I go in and try again, as I got completely wrecked. However, we did end up winning and I had a great time. They also offer 3v3 arena as well as the open world PvP, which you can opt into at any time, which could actually be beneficial while leveling, because if you're flagged for PvP, you actually get a 10% boost to experience gained. But of course, you have to be wary of the many people trying to gank you. And then of course, the open world wars involving factions and territories. All of these are things I would love to sink my teeth into a bit more, but the problem with coming to a game 2 years late is that there's a lot of information about builds and metas that I'd probably have to catch up on in order to really jump into it. So we'll save that for a future video. And third, something that I have to talk about because I think it's the bane of the gaming industry and needs to be addressed fairly for pretty much any game: monetization, the FOMO, anti-consumer, predatory MTX hellscape that festers in multi-million-dollar corporate greed, slowly taking over and manifesting our innocent and lovely passion we call gaming. Well, New World's not too bad at all, with almost no real discernible pay to win. The initial game has a box price which ran me about $55 Canadian, no subscription fee, and of course Rise of the Angry Earth was the first paid DLC or extra piece of content, costing another about $40. There is a battle pass that features both a free and paid track of rewards. The free version gives you content at every level, as well as the paid version. Things in this pass include some legendary and artifact gear, some cosmetics, plenty of item rewards such as potions or kits for crafting. There is also weapon bonus XP, which helps you level up your weapons a little bit faster, while technically pay to win, it's very tiny. The paid version of the pass only costs $20, and if you complete the entire thing, you'll get $5 back. Compared to many other games in the MMO genre, this is minuscule and inoffensive to me personally. So let's talk about Rise of the Angry Earth, the expansion. You start off with a questline that begins in a zone called Reekwater, and it quickly transfers you over to the new area, Elysian Wilds, which was previously known as First Light. I thought they did an excellent job with the visual part of the zone. It still felt like New World, but overall had an awesome art style and direction with many different types of areas and creatures. Mob density was a little bit lower and less annoying than I had seen in some of the other zones, and overall I felt like they did a great job with this area. Too many times in games you see them add an expansion and they change up the art style or direction so much that it almost feels like you're playing a completely different game. This was not the case at all with New World. The expansion also added a new weapon, the Flail, which you can combine with a shield slot to be a defensive or healing weapon. It increased the level cap to 65 and increased the maximum gear score achievable to 700, up from 625. They also increased the maximum level for all trade skills to 250, up from 200. There's an entire new rarity of gear known as artifact gear, as well as a new expedition. It honestly only took me a few hours to play through the entire expansion storyline, which took me all the way to level 65. The story was cool, the boss fights were fun, and I'm excited to continue exploring in the Elysian Wilds. And finally, with all of that being said, let's talk about some of my favorite things about New World. Number 1, the interactable and immersive world with amazing visuals and even sound design that just allows you to get so lost within it. The unique and easy to learn but hard to master action combat system. Third, the intuitive and interesting trade skills from gathering and refining to processing and being able to interact with almost every object in the game allows you to feel so much more involved in your character's actual progress through trade skills. And finally, the ease of access for changing your playstyle and trying different builds without requiring alts or secondary characters. You can do everything on your main and switch fairly easily. That being said, if I had to pick some of the things that I would like to see Amazon games work on or remove, they would be: 1. Stop allowing stacks of multiple enemies to stagger lock my character into being unable to complete any action. This just feels bad. 2. Add swimming. Seriously, water is such a pointless part of the environment if I can't properly move through it. 3. Diversify the zones and the mobs within zones so it feels less copy and paste throughout the game. And finally, create better character mobility in terms of jumping and movement so that it feels more fluid and more second nature. Overall, I think people love to hate New World, but with this new expansion and my personal time spent playing the game, I think if you haven't tried it yet, now is your time. The game is looking excellent in 2023, and it's only looking better and better moving forward. A lot of the things that I would have had issues with if I started this game when it released in 2021 have already been fixed up and worked on. So generally, looking towards the future, I mostly anticipate more positive and well thought out changes. Even if action combat is not your type of thing that you might be interested in, I think New World is worth picking up just for the insanely immersive and beautiful visuals. Seriously, just go fishing or become a crafter, you won't regret spending time in Aeternum. Sometimes I literally just stop and turn off the game's user interface and look at the world. It's seriously well designed. I'm really looking forward to diving into Endgame and trying out some more expeditions on higher difficulties, as well as making a PvP build and leveling up all of my trade skills to the max level. Hey, subscribe if you liked the video. Make sure to like, make sure to comment. If you really enjoyed the video, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. But thank you guys for watching to the end, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Oh, and don't forget, let me know what other games you want to see me try or revisit. We could go back to Guild Wars, we could do more New World, we can play whatever we want. So you guys let me know. But yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.